of keeps me on track. And I've got a little presentation here. And if you did see me at the summit, there's some stuff in here that's similar, but here's the thing. I know you guys talk about this all the time, right? And you hear it all the time. Lift heavy shit, lift heavy shit. So I changed this to let's actually lift the heavy shit. Okay. My goal, not necessarily like just today, but over the course of this process, is to try and get as many people to start doing that thing. What do we need to do to actually start doing it? And like Stephanie asked, like, how do we fit it in, right? Like, that's a bigger question, and it's probably a little more personal, but like we're going to try and do that. So like, I'm going to talk a little bit about it, like general big overview looking down, but then I want to really dig in. So if you have questions as we go through this, like drop them in the chat or think about them, as we're going. I just want to make sure you guys know who I am. I live in Albuquerque. I literally just moved here, which is why I don't understand what summer is like. But this is my full-time job. I do strength and conditioning. I coach people online. I coach people in person, and I've done that for a really long time. I also am a rower. I moved somewhere where there is no water, so I can only claim this for so much longer, but I do coach people on the indoor rowing machine, and I do that all the time. So I am kind of a multi-sport athlete. I wouldn't say I necessarily compete in rowing, but I do a lot of rowing because I am teaching people how to row all the time and doing kind of on-demand classes and things like that. I'm a competitive powerlifter, more than a decade of that. I've been coaching for many years. I did CrossFit, I coached boot camps, I coach rowing, coach strength training. I've hosted a podcast, More Female Strength. I talk about this stuff all the time from lots of different perspectives. I've done lots of different things. I have a toddler, which I think is the hardest thing of all. And then I just put down here my max weight so that you know what's heavy to me, right? We're going to talk about that, like what is heavy. This is heavy to me. And I'm actually competing in a powerlifting meet in 2 weeks. And I'm hoping to just meet these goals. I haven't competed in a meet in 4 years. I had a baby, I went through IVF, I did all kinds of things. And so if I can just match these, I'll feel real good. But that's what's heavy to me. So what is heavy, right? Like defined, it's of great weight, difficult to lift or move, but like we know that's different for everybody, right? So this is very relative to you. It's not, you will not get from me a number. You're not going to get a number from me. Honestly, you're not even going to get like, you need to do reps within this realm, because we need to do kind of both, right? And you'll see kind of as I lay out a program, but generally, yeah, sure. It's on the lower rep range so that we can lift heavier weight. But it's still super relative to you. It does need to be something that can stress our body enough so that it wants to change. What doesn't kill you literally makes you stronger is a totally legit statement. And that can be a very small thing for one person and a very big thing for another person. And then we want heavy to be something that allows us to produce more force. Strength is defined as our ability to exert force against an external object. And so we want something that increases that ability, right? And what you'll notice what I talk about today is the rep ranges and the weight on the bar, but also this level of exertion, because again, that's relative. So keeping those things in mind. Why is it important? I don't need to drill this stuff down to you guys. I'm pretty sure you're getting it from all angles, right? But being stronger, strength in general, is just kind of like the bottom, the foundation that just makes everything else a little bit easier. There's these other benefits like increasing your metabolic rate. It builds stronger bones. We know where we are in our life. By the way, I'm 42. I haven't yet gone through that menopause, but I am very close. But as we go through these different phases of our life, our bodies start to change in ways where we don't have as much control, right? So lifting heavy allows us to bring some of that control back in the form of learning these additional movement patterns. You might have spent decades improving your swimming, your cycling, whatever it is. This allows you to do something new and it improves all these other parts of your life. When we focus on lifting heavy, we can kind of capitalize on the strength gains, but also hypertrophy gains, right? We get better at movement in general. And then overall, it's not going to eliminate the risk of injury, but it certainly will reduce the risk. So obviously important. Okay, so that's kind of like the most stuff that if you had watched the summit that I kind of talked about. Now I kind of want to like dive in, like what do we do here, right? And I'm gonna just simplify. This is the theme of today. Keep it simple, okay? It doesn't need to be special. We're not all special, unique people. When it comes to strength, we can all kind of do about the same thing. And once we get started, we can start to deviate and figure out how we need to apply it to our specific circumstances. But in the beginning, we're going to keep it simple. All right. So we're going to learn the movements, we're going to follow a program, and we're going to auto-regulate. So how does that work? Learning the movements, like I said, keeping it simple, right? Your sport, whatever it is, and I feel as if many of the people inside of these, these groups with Feisty are doing other sports, right? You're already an athletic person. And it's very specific to whatever your training is, very specific to that thing. If you're a cyclist, you're riding your bike. If you're running, you're running. If you're swimming, you're swimming. And strength doesn't need to be specific to that sport, right? It only needs to be specific to the strength training that you're doing. And I'll take that even a step further. While there may be considerations as we're training that need to be taken to whatever part of your journey in life you're going through, whether you're post-menopause or you're perimenopause, or you're just living your life as a 42-year-old, like those considerations can be taken into account. But even then, it doesn't need to be specialized, right? We can still all do this simple program. So what I'm trying to do is like remove the barriers, make this very easy to do. It's not like you need to wait for this specific thing for you. And the reason why we can do that is because the program is so simple and there are ways for us to auto-regulate it. So basically, your strength training doesn't need to look like your sport training, okay? It doesn't mean you need to like crank the gear up on your bicycle and just ride at a much heavier gear and get stronger, right? It's a totally separate skill. So which skills, which movements do we want to learn? I'm gonna get like narrow this down to 5. And I know this looks like 1,200 and you're like, what? But it just start at the top, right? All I'm doing is providing alternatives. Obviously, I work for barbell medicine. I love barbells. I think they're great. You don't have to use a barbell. Someone asked a question about tonal, and I just spent like 20 minutes deep diving into a tonal hole. And I was like, wow, this thing's actually like super cool, right? So it doesn't need to be a barbell. The barbell, I think, is probably the most efficient use of your time, right? You're going to get the most bang for your buck. But if it comes at a compromise of you feeling horribly uncomfortable, you don't know what to do, you're in a space that doesn't want you there, or you're scared, right? Or you're not ready, then it's not worth it. Let's do something else, right? Or you just like these things better. That's also okay too. But let's start with this top row here, right? So we're just looking for a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, an overhead press, and a row. Everything below that are just variations on that. And I'm happy to go into details of all that, right? But I want to give you this overview, and then we can, dive into some other stuff. Follow a program. Again, keep it simple, right? This is kind of the idea here. What we want is a program where we have the opportunity to learn, figure out how to train, figure out how that fits into our other training that we're already doing, and grow from there. We want that program to allow us to progressively load heavier, right? Or assuming we can add weight to the bar or pick up a heavier dumbbell, maybe not every time, maybe every other time, but allowing those movements and that program to allow for that, right? So if you only have 5-pound dumbbells, it gets really hard to overload that system. Like I said, barbells are great. Other things work. We want to train the full body. We can do that in lots of different ways. I say a great program is 3 days a week. If you're in the middle of a season training for big races and that's your priority, 2 is good. 1 is probably even okay if you've put in the work beforehand. Okay. But 3 is kind of that sweet spot, especially when you're just getting started. I did say, you know, we kind of have different rep ranges here, but for the most part, it's lower rep ranges, right? We don't really go up over the 10s into the 20s because then the weight just gets lighter. We could do that as long as we're also doing the lower rep ranges with the heavier weight. And in the beginning, we can assume that we will get stronger over time. And if you're coming into this and having not done a program like this, you will see gains. The third kind of big thing, and these are, I'm just generalizing these things so that I can dive into it over the course of this whole, you know, module, so that we understand what we're going to want to know and just have a general idea of how to work. But autoregulation is the key. This has absolutely shifted and changed the way that I train and the way I train others in the last probably like 3 or 4 years. It's essentially we are adjusting the intensity inside of the session. So some people might have already been performing of a percentage off of a 1 rep max, right? Or an assumed 1 rep max. So maybe you're always doing 60% by, you know, 5 reps for 3 sets. So essentially we are saying instead of basing it off a percentage, we'll base it off of a level of exertion. And that means we have that flexibility to change within the session, which is important for any human being, right? We're complex human beings with lots of stuff going on, but it's especially important for someone who's doing something else. Let's say you had like a really hard training session the day before and your legs are wrecked. You can still squat. You can still do the program and still get a stress adaptation from that. It just, we know that the stress won't need to be as high. The weight doesn't need to be as high for your body to want to adapt because it's already fatigued, right? So this is how you fit it in and not destroy yourself. It takes some time to kind of develop an understanding of the method, but it works. And it works for all different parts of our life. And you probably already do these kind of things. Right here, I put, we're going to talk mostly about RPE, the rating of perceived exertion, but there's velocity-based training and reps in reserve, all kinds of different ways of looking at these concepts. I will happily discuss RPE as much as possible. We just did a podcast about it. But essentially, we are, instead of dictating the intensity in pounds or kilograms, we're dictating it in a level of exertion. And when we do that, the weight on the bar doesn't matter. And you can pull back, even emotionally, you know, dislodge yourself from whatever that number is and focus on the work that's being done. And while that's subjective and takes a little bit of time to learn, it allows you to become a more mature athlete. And you probably already do this in your other sport too, right? Sometimes you know you need to back off a little bit in order to do the other thing or whatever it is, right? This is just a way for you to do it that still maintains a structure within your strength training. And I think what people find the hardest thing about starting is they don't know what weight they should do. It's a lot of other things like technical things and finding a safe space and those like logistical things, but a lot of it is just, I don't know how to progress. And so this allows a structure for you to progress, but also gives you that autonomy and control that allows you to do this for longer, right? I could just dictate it to you. I could be a dictator. I could be like, yo, do this. You didn't do it? Oh, you're a failure, right? This way you get to find that control and decide what is best for you in that moment. And I know that sounds nuanced and you're like, well, then I can just lift whatever I want, right? Well, we set these kind of qualitative things in place that kind of help us do it. And that's what this chart is laying out. And I'm not going to go through it. We can go through it at a later time. Like I said, I'm just kind of laying out the big parts of this. So yeah, it just allows you to do concurrent training and also allows for just the flexibility of being a weird human on this messed up world sometimes, right? All right. So what does this look like? Okay. And I see your questions, guys, too, about like, ooh, knacks for getting weights off the bar. I got one for you. And yes, one exercise from each of the categories, you could do all that on one day, but you wouldn't, right? So Stephanie, as you'll see here, day one, and let's say this is just the 3-day, right? Day one would be you would squat, bench, and deadlift. And day two, you would press, squat again, and do rows. And on day 3, you would deadlift, bench, and squat. And you can see that the rep ranges are going to change. So on day 1, the focus is on the squat, right? That's where we have the lower reps, and we will likely have the higher weight. On day 2, we're squatting again. This is key when you are just getting started. This is 5 things, right? You don't have to wrap your head around 20 things. It's 5 things. And every single day we practice squatting, and squatting is the most complex, right? So that's the one we can kind of, and it can be the most complex if we're talking about using a barbell, but it also is the one that's just going to give you the most bang for your buck. And the weight will be lighter on day 2, and it'll be even lighter on day 3. We can also, instead of just doing squats there, we could do unilateral work too, right? If that's something really important to you. And Tanya says, do you suggest changing up the types of squats? Not at first. And first, I'd say, do it all the same. When I'm working with a new beginner, whether it's online or in person, the benefit of just practicing it every time you go in is huge, because a lot of this, using this, is confidence, right? It sucks that like that's the thing that keeps us all from doing it, but we're like, I don't want to look stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to learn a new thing. I'm 52 years old. Like my time is done. So practice it, right? And what I find with, something like this is that, one, I'm not dictating a weight. I'm simply giving you like a level of exertion. And if we go back and look at, this chart, right? An RPE 6 leaves 4 reps in the tank, and it's easy end of warm up. Your form looks really good, right? A 7, 1 less rep, and then an 8. So it's not like we're going up to like max, you're going to fall on the floor, you can't do any more. We're just working up to a weight that feels challenging. And on day 1, like day 1 of day 1, that just might be like where you're like, this is cool. I'm going to stop here till someone tells me if I'm doing it well or not, right? Or this is where I'm comfortable at the moment. And the idea is that the next time you come back to this, so if we go to week 2, we're essentially doing the same thing. The idea is, let's say you did week 1, you did 50 pounds for 4 reps at an RP 6. You did 50, 55, 60, right? Our assumption on week 2 is that you got a little bit stronger, right? So we might go 55, 60, 65. That's it, right? We're talking about really small little jumps. But if we add 5 pounds to our squat every week for 3 months, that's math, but that's like 50 pounds, right? Or something, right? I don't know. I can't do the math. 3, whatever. You get the point. It adds up, right? And all the weight on the bar doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're getting more proficient at a movement, and you're continually adding weight, stressing your body in new ways, and you're getting stronger. So this, from week 1 to week 2, there's not a big change except more volume at the heavier weights. That's what you'll see here, right? Otherwise, everything stays the same. Now, to be clear, this program, and you're going to get an actual PDF of this program, like the free PDF that we give out at Barbell Medicine, with much more description about it. It is designed for anybody who is brand new to strength training, anybody who's kind of coming back from an injury or hasn't done it in a while. And I don't believe it needs to be somebody that's completely detrained, right? It could be something that's also already very strong. They could run this program and still see really good gains from it. But what you'll see at the bottom is that conditioning. If you're already doing a bunch of other training, you don't need to add in more of that conditioning, right? But it does work really well for someone who's coming in and not doing anything at all, right? We kind of ramp that up. Week 2, 3, and 4 are pretty much the same. Here's the thing. This shit is not sexy. It's not sexy. It's not fancy. It's not going to get different every week. By week 4, if you're still adding weight to the bar on each of those things, you just keep doing this week until you don't add weight to the bar anymore, until it stops working. Then you start making a change, right? It doesn't need to change every week. So it's a very simple thing that I'm trying to lay out for you that doesn't need to be complicated. And I have already brought in probably at least 6 or 7 women from Feisty Menopause and their content, and they are all running this program. Stephanie asked about the conditioning. The conditioning would be your other training, right? And if I was working with you personally, we would make sure we're fitting in all that stuff and not overloading you. But the benefit here is that using this RPE, we can make sure that we're not overtraining, right? We're finding that level of exertion that allows you to stay within the realm you need to. If after 4 weeks, you're just bone tired and can't function and not adjusting to it, then maybe there needs to be some adjustment, right? But I think initially everybody can kind of start with this. So let's kind of talk about that. Like, how do we how do we add this in? And Jennifer, I'm going to show you a schedule, like a potential schedule, right? And Stephanie, we can also definitely talk about mobility stuff, right? How do you do these things together, right? Because we're using autoregulation, you can do them on the same day. My general rule of thumb is if you have the option to do the strength training first, right? Depends on what your sport of choice is, but generally the neuromuscular recruitment and the kind of thoughts that is going into the strength training, if we can do that first, that would probably be beneficial. But that leaves you in a different spot for your other training. So there may be some ways where that needs to be adjusted, and it should work out both ways fine. Obviously, you have to kind of go into this with an open mind. There may be some extra fatigue as you add in something new, right? So maybe don't do this with like right before a really big race or something like that. So you kind of want to make sure that you're open to there being some kind of just setback in whatever other thing you're doing. And then as you go forward, you might determine that you have a season where you're focusing on your strength and you do maybe one day less of your other sport, and then a season where strength training becomes just maintenance. And like I said, that could go to one day as long as you've kind of put in the front loaded work beforehand. 2 times a week is still good though, right? Still good. And I would almost always ask someone to have at least 1 full rest day a week, right? Tanya asked about deload weeks, right? Yeah. So if you look at this, the program that I laid out in the kind of freebie that I'm giving you, it's going to show you the first 4 weeks. If you were to run that program legitimately, and there's, you can go and look at the full template, there are deload weeks kind of built into that. And you could maybe assume that a deload week would come somewhere in the range of probably 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. It varies per person, and we kind of determine that based on like the content that emerges as we go. There's a concept of emerging strategies in the way that we approach programming. But in general, most people kind of need that deload after like 6 to 8 weeks. But I'll be honest, if you're just starting this, you probably don't. You could probably keep going for like 8 to 10 to 12 weeks before you're like needing to deload and see more. And if you haven't done this at all, don't worry about 8 weeks from now, right? Just start it. So this is kind of some layouts of scheduling. So they're just general suggestions of the way you might structure your week, depending on how much rest you need or how much volume you need to get in of your other sport. And my general rule of thumb for your strength training would be to do every other day, if you could, right? Every other day gives you a lot of rest in between those strength workouts, a lot of time to kind of adapt from the stress. But if that's not allowed, like you can't do it because of the way your week is structured, then that's fine. We just do 2 in a row. And the beauty of the RPE and honestly, the fluctuating rep schemes will allow for that. This is if you were going to do 3 times of strength and 3 times of another activity. So you can see you can kind of couple them on specific days, and maybe here you get more rest in between. Again, this stuff really depends on your personal kind of experimentation of how you feel and what other things you're doing. And then this would be if you're going to strength train twice a week. I like to keep 2 to 3 days in between those days, right? You wouldn't necessarily want to do like Monday, Tuesday strength training and then not come back again till Monday, right? Spreading it out just a little bit. 1, it helps your body be like, okay, this is what we're doing, cool. And 2, it helps you kind of remember the cues workout to workout, right? Yes, do you outline how many sets you do for each exercise to warm up in the handout? Yes. So in the barbell medicine program, they talk about warm-ups just a little bit, and I go into a little more detail about that in an additional handout there with it. And these are also things like perhaps the next time we're together, we can really kind of dive into what that program might look for a specific person, because that's where things kind of get confusing. But these are kind of things that you guys tell me, right? Are these things you would be interested in talking about? Not all today, right? But things that I would like to go over would be to show you how to do some of these lifts. How exactly does the program work and how should it work, right? So, I mean, you don't have to do my program. I don't care. I want you guys to lift heavy. It's great, if you do. But like, what are you looking for? How do we actually use that auto-regulation, right? In an actual real setting? When do we make adjustments to that? How, like, you just asked how to properly warm up. How do we set up a home gym? What do we need? What barbells? What other crap do we need? And so any of those things, like, yeah, Marianne, like what do we do when we're not at the gym, right? I'll tell you that. I mean, if you have bands, sure, great. Most of the time, let's say you were like all in, you were like, I'm going to do barbell training. I'm in, it's going to be awesome. And you train like 3 weeks and then you went away and you missed like 2 workouts. It would be beneficial to do something in your hotel room, whether it was just some body weight squats, whether it was some dumbbells down in the gym or bands or whatever, mostly so you don't get super sore when you come back to the barbell, right? That's number 1. Number 2, which may even be more important, you just maintain the habit. That's kind of a bigger one too, right? So, but there are, based on those alternatives that I laid out, right? Most of the time you might be able to find some dumbbells, a heavy milk jug, small child, a really big cat. I've seen some big cats. So anyways, this is the last slide. And then I want to like open up to some questions, but I think making the decision that this is something you want to do is the biggest part, right? Making the decision and then acknowledging that you might need some help with it. That's also, I like to really like overly compliment people when they hire me as a coach. I'm like, well done. You have made the first really, really big step. But you don't need to hire a coach. You can do this. You can try it out. If you already have access to a gym, you can go and do this. The big part of this is finding a space that feels like you can learn, right? And you're not feeling watched or judged. And there are really good spaces. And if anybody's like, I live here, I don't know where to go, Like, you can always message me and ask me, I will find out, right? I try to know where to go and where the good people are. But doing it with someone, always helpful. Don't beat yourself up if you can't do it right. And know that, especially if you did hire a coach, and doing things like online coaching requires a lot of like self-introspect when you're doing these things and watching yourself and videos, and it's really easy to overthink and overanalyze, right? So we have to keep it simple. You can always modify and scale. Like I have in the videos I'm sending you a way to do an overhead press with a broomstick, right? So most people, honestly, even if you had the barbell, you probably can't press the barbell over your head. So start with a broomstick and tie some rags around the weights. It works just fine. And then these are just some folks that I like on Instagram that are also doing other sports and strength training. So they're talking about the things that you guys want to talk about. So I put that there. And like Celine said, this whole presentation will be shared with you. So you don't have to